Imran Khan has been succeeded by yet another Prime Minister in Pakistan. And the word that is out is that Imran essentially failed to deliver economically and stepped into the army's turf in respect to decisions on foreign policy, and also tried to interfere with some of the appointments of senior officers of the military. All these areas are something that traditionally Pakistani prime ministers have kept away from or have been asked to keep away from by the army, which insists that they aren't fully aware of Pakistan's strategic concerns and therefore can't take the right decisions in Pakistan's interest. But where has this tradition come from? Pakistan has a very powerful military. Some say the military has a country and not that the country has a military, as in the case of India. And this military has established some very clear benchmarks about how Pakistan is to run and how they will call the shots in key areas that affect their interests. In fact, I would argue that the most powerful political party in Pakistan is the Pakistan Army. And this tradition has got regularly reinforced from the times of General Zia, who, as we know, was a long-serving dictator of Pakistan and had used successive prime ministers to give a kind of token yes to Zia's policies on how Pakistan should find its way forward. Zia's two big legacies were the fact that Zia used terror groups and terrorism to further Pakistan's agenda. India had been at the receiving end of that, and Zia had already been doing that quite extensively in Afghanistan with American and Saudi support when the Russians were in Afghanistan. But the other contribution of Zia was the placement of the 8th Amendment to Pakistan's constitution, which, as we know, is a constitution that Zulfikar Bhutto drafted after he put the army back into the barracks with the debacle of the 1971 war. And in that constitution, he tried hard to make civilian rule supreme. But unfortunately, Bhutto began to challenge the army's writ in lots of areas and was driving Pakistan, despite the pretense of a democracy, into one-party rule, and therefore the army got into the game, marginalized Bhutto, jailed him, and then nailed him for his role in the murder of a political opponent. Thereafter, Zia put in place the 8th Amendment. Now, what is the 8th Amendment? The 8th Amendment is an amendment to Pakistan's constitution that allows the President of Pakistan, for a variety of reasons, to sack any government and any prime minister, and the reasons could be quite frivolous, as we have seen historically in the post-Zia period. The other thing that Zia's 8th Amendment brought about was the message to political leaders, and Benazir, Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif were recipients of that messaging, that you will not enter areas like Pakistan's nuclear policies, its nuclear arsenal, the military's budgeting, the policy vis-a-vis India, the policy vis-a-vis China, Afghanistan, and of course the United States. But over a period of time, as the military became more and more powerful, it began to draw on much of Pakistan's limited economic resources. So effectively, some have argued that more than 50% of Pakistan's budgetary allocations are given to the military to run their business, and none of their businesses are really taxed. So they are in everything from waterworks to transportation to hospitals to a whole lot of other trade and other engagements which are neither audited nor are taxed. So Pakistan is a country which is limited to maybe about 1% of their population that gets taxed, which has to pay for the adventures of the big establishment that is the military. So Pakistan's economic situation is precarious to say the least. Its external debt now stands at about $92.8 billion. It's likely to fault on its debt repayment. It is looking for handouts from the international community, but the three countries that have been in recent years bailing Pakistan out are the Chinese, most recently with $4 billion, the Saudis with $3 billion, and the UAE with $2 billion. America, which used to give lots of money to Pakistan and its generals and had spoilt them for choices, is now not giving any more money after the American humiliation in Afghanistan, where America knows but doesn't muster the guts enough to tell Pakistan on its face that you pulled the carpet from under our feet. But why is Pakistan's military so hung up on running the country? One is, of course, their total control that they want to have on foreign policy, but more importantly, what Aisha Siddiqa in her powerful book on the Pakistan Army called Military INC calls Milbus, which is military business. They are the largest landholders in Pakistan. About 43% of Pakistan's land belongs to the military to be given away for anything the military thinks as appropriate to its officers and men, and most retiring generals get large plots of land as gifts, and every Jawan and NCO also gets in his village. The other thing that the Pakistanis want is greater say in Pakistan's program for nuclear weapons, which is Pakistan's selling card in the Arab and Islamic world, that they have the Islamic bomb. Now, in both these areas, vast sums of money that comes from outside gets siphoned in, and the Pakistani military therefore needs to keep the bogey of an Indian threat alive, so that the country and the countrymen, and interestingly, even politicians in public life, swear by the need for the army to get more and more equipment and become stronger and stronger. Why? To face an existential threat which they believe comes from India, and to allow Pakistan to play a more domineering role, as it were, in Afghanistan, because they all believe that Afghanistan has massive mineral and rare earth resources that Pakistan could tap and one day become rich, and the fact that if Pakistan controls Afghanistan, that India can't corner it from both sides. Both the assumptions are wrong, but nobody can stand and say this on the face to the Pakistani military brass. But where the problem of the military now comes is that Imran Khan, in an effort to checkmate the military, one, made a mess of the finances, but that he wouldn't do intentionally. That would have probably been Imran's want, because Imran was incapable of turning the economy around. The other area where Imran played up against the army's agenda was to engage with Russia. Now, he went to Moscow to meet President Putin at the start of the Ukrainian invasion and got what he claimed was a Pakistani rupee Russian ruble deal to get oil at half prices from where they would get elsewhere in the Gulf countries. Just like a deal Imran had done with the Chinese establishment called the Pakistani rupee and the Chinese yuan deal in 2019. But the army was so cornered by what Imran did and the publicity it got that General Bajwa actually came out in public and challenged what Imran had done in Russia, and again indicated to America that we are not a lost cause. They like to keep all options open. More importantly, Pakistan's military brass hats all have their children studying in America. Their parents and family members use American medical facilities. And I wouldn't be surprised if most of the generals also have a green card. So America is something they would still look towards and go in that direction, as against China, which they look for bailing out against India, as China uses Pakistan to project a two-front threat to India. But where do things go from here? So Mr. Shahbaz Sharif and those champions of Indo-Pak peace who believe that Shahbaz coming in would get in a new era of India-Pakistan relationship on a happier note would do well not to try and enter into that area. His biggest challenge is to turn the economy around. My guess is he'll do a better job than Imran because he is a seasoned politician. He is also a businessman and therefore knows numbers a lot better than Imran does. But the other area that Shahbaz Sharif would do well is to try and strike a balance between all the right-wing Islamist groups that are running all over Pakistan. Imran has started engaging with them, whether it was the Tehreek-e-Labbaik or it was the Tehreek-e-Taliban and others, and Imran's political constituencies are all in the AFPAC region. These people have now decided to gather money to launch a jihad within Pakistan. Few people know that by now there are as many loosely running small arm cartels in Pakistan as the number of soldiers in the Pakistan army. So therefore the army cannot take the jihadi groups or the militants on head on, and the army is going to try and compromise with them, but compromises always create embarrassments in the long run, as we know. But whether the Pakistan army can compromise with all these groups that operate in Sindh, Karachi, Baluchistan and the frontier regions and still remain the most powerful entity in Pakistan, or will the Pakistan army look for a distraction when internal troubles become too much and raise the tempo of tensions with India, because that is a perennial distraction that the Pakistan army has used to try and garner public sentiment and funding. That is going to be the big question over the next several months till Pakistan goes in for the next election. And the other question is, could Imran bounce back? Because Imran has a lot of support with the youth in Pakistan, with the regular right-wing jihadist groups now, and with the women in Pakistan who are all saying that we are beggars and we can't be choosers, so we want Imran back, and Jalal Bajwa and his gang are traitors. Now this is something that has been unheard of in Pakistan. So what we are going to see in the next several months is a very interesting set of events in Pakistan. My personal view is, if Pakistan continues to simmer and boil under the boiling point, it is good for India, because the military will remain distracted with problems within instead of trying to create problems outside Pakistan with India. But that only time will tell.